in like the first couple years that people were working with solvers, everyone was obsessed with figuring out the right bet sizes everywhere. And it never matters. It never ever matters. It like you take some spot, some, 3-bet pot or whatever, or single raise pot, and like the best strategy is 30% check and 70% bet 60% pot or whatever. And if you force the computer to play bet 80% or bet 45%, it'll adjust the frequency up or down accordingly and put about the same amount of money in the pot, and it will cost you literally zero EV. Like, you cannot see the difference.
Ike Haxton, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a while. I've had the privilege, as you know, of interviewing you a bunch of times for the book in which you feature as one of the characters, and nonfiction book, so character, maybe a strange word, but every time I come out of an interview with Ike, my girlfriend always notices a look on my face, and she's like, "What's up?" This guy's so fucking smart. I always feel like I pick something up. There's always some question that I ask you where I think I know where you're going to go with the answer, and you just surprise the hell out of me. And I'm like, I've never thought about it like that. So pressure's on for today.
All right, yeah, I'm feeling it. That was a serious introduction.
Yeah, for sure.
Try to live up to it.
So let me quote you back something from one of those interviews, which
Okay.
is about your routine at tournaments. I thought this was interesting because I think you might be a bit of an outlier in the high stakes tournament world with your pre tournament routine, if we call it. Quote, my poker tournament routine for more or less as long as I can remember is I set my alarm for 2 hours before I need to be at the table. Sometimes push it to 90 minutes if I feel like I could really use the extra 30. And when my alarm goes off, I take a 200 milligram caffeine pill, hit snooze, fall back asleep for 1 to 4 snooze cycles, roll around in bed for an hour, meditate for 8 minutes, take a shower, catch up on texts and organizational stuff, maybe a quick studying 1 or 2 hands before, play, then head out to play. Nothing outside of the room almost ever before the tournament. No breakfast. Is that more or less still accurate today?
Yeah, pretty much. Pushing the meditation to more like 12 or even 16 minutes sometimes lately, but otherwise, yeah, about the same.
Excellent. How long has meditation been a part of your routine?
Got to be a little more than 15 years at this point. I think I started in my early 20s, like just after I finished college and moved to Vegas when I was 22 or 23. So yeah, about 15 years now. I've barely missed a day since I got serious about it. Usually not more than, yeah, 8 to 16 minutes. I like multiples of 2 for some reason, and adjust it up and down a little based on my mood and how much time I have. But yeah, just very basic, set a timer and pay attention to my breath for a little while. I find it really helps me kind of center my mind and be more intentional and less impulsive about everything I do, whether it's like poker decisions or conversations I'm having with other people. Yeah, my life's just gotten a lot better since I started doing it. I have found it very useful. Really like it. At this point, like the idea of trying to go about my day without having done it makes me nervous. I have to do it before I do anything else. Like my apartment could be on fire. I'd be thinking, can I squeeze in 4 minutes before I deal with it?
That feels like where a lot of people are trying to get. I'm kind of on the other side where it always feels like work for me to sit down and try to practice. I tend to be quite glad, especially whenever I get momentum, if I, manage to string a week together, which hasn't really
Mhm.
happened for a while, to be honest. But that feels very much, I feel like there's probably a lot of people like me who hear that and say, wow, that's the goal. Kind of like a lot of people who don't go to the gym who hear about someone who gets anxious or frustrated when they miss a gym day. And that's kind of like, when routine becomes habit and it's just, so deeply ingrained as a part of who you are.
For sure, yeah, and there are not a whole lot of other things in my life that I think of as, like, habits or routines that I'm inflexible about. That's just about the only one, to be honest.
Mhm. When I hear about your pre-tournament routine and a little bit about your post-tournament routine also, actually, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you kind of unwind if you, let's say, bag a Triton and find yourself heading back to the room around 1 a.m. What does that look like?
I've typically eaten not very much throughout the course of a day of tournament poker, so just about 100% of the time I'm eating a big meal before I go to bed when I finish playing at the end of the night. Um, that's kind of always been my routine, and I find I sleep better when I'm going to sleep with a full stomach, and yeah, it just sort of suits me. I know other people don't find this at all appealing. I'm not trying to convince anybody to be like me, but yeah, I don't feel hungry early in the day, and I find that eating very much, even on dinner break, like 8 hours into my day or whatever, makes me feel a little sluggish, makes my brain slower. And so I like to keep my food intake very light throughout the day and then eat a ton between end of play and going to sleep. And, kind of by leaning into that, like I'm waking up still full. I ate a lot and went to sleep, and I'm not hungry when I get up. I have plenty of nutrition to fuel my body through the day, and I feel good. It's not like I'm feeling hungry all day and like struggling to not eat because I think it's best. Like this is just the way of managing my nutrition during a busy poker schedule that I find most comfortable. So yeah, finish up play, pretty much immediately get something to eat. The options are sometimes better, sometimes worse, depending on the tournament venue, but almost everywhere we play has either 24-hour room service or somewhere to go after play ends. Generally try not to think too much about poker in that time unless there's a very pressing reason to. Um, if there are a few hands from the day that are bugging me that I really want to look up, I will. But yeah, mostly focused on relaxing, winding down, getting to sleep as soon as I can. Maybe casual conversation with some friends about poker or not. But it's just so hard to stay well rested during a poker trip. Like, from cards in the air to bagging is often around 12 hours. And then from bagging to playing the next day is rarely more than 12 hours, sometimes 10 or 11. And so you just put like a little bit of taking care of yourself on either end of that. And it's awfully hard to get 8 hours of sleep. So yeah, I really just prioritize getting as much sleep as I can in the time that I'm not playing during a busy poker trip.
Yeah, I'm with you. I feel like sleep is pretty much everything, especially when you're talking about having many days left in the trip. If it's, the very end, do whatever you need, I guess, to play well the next day. But it seems like sleep is just the one that you can't really catch up on. For
Right.
me, exercise, I'll try to stay in shape outside of a trip, and then during a trip, kind of eat whatever I want and just do whatever is going to make me feel good for that week or whatever, however long that trip lasts.
I completely agree. Yeah, I do exercise between poker trips. I do think staying fit is just a good thing to do for your general well-being, but also yeah, it does give you a competitive advantage. Poker is physically taxing in a sense. You do get physically fatigued, and being healthier probably helps a little. But yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to prioritize exercising during a poker trip over getting enough sleep when that is already hard to do. That
Hmm. You said occasionally you'll look up if a couple of hands were bugging you from the day.
Yeah.
And at this point, when I hear that from you, those words bugging me kind of goes through an Ike Haxton filter, which means something different than it does when I hear it from, let's say, Nick Petrangelo. Um, a hand. Let me read back another Ike quote that I really liked. I know a lot of people who take mistakes a lot harder than I do and respond to a mistake by identifying with fixing that exact problem. Make sure they never make that mistake again. That works for people. I don't want to shit on that strategy. It seems like in some cases they experience an unnecessary amount of pain around the whole. I don't think it's exactly maladaptive all the time. It can be. A person can become obsessed with a mistake that they make in some exotic scenario and spend a lot of time on a not very important problem. I think I'm driven by curiosity a bit more than a competitive sort of perfectionism, a bit more than a lot of my peers. And I think that's mostly served me well. It makes things more fun and relaxing to go about it that sort of way. It doesn't make me immune to the sort of inefficient tangents that I described. I can get fixated on even making a specific mistake that can be impetuous for me too. I think it's just different personalities, and I don't think one is better or worse. Can you talk a bit about that? Because ever since you said that to me, that was in April of last year, I thought a lot about that and about the things that I really enjoy having a pretty high level of curiosity around them. And poker being one of them. I've enjoyed poker at various different levels. And I think how high my curiosity is has a pretty direct correlation to how much I'm enjoying it. And when I don't feel like something is particularly novel to me, I kind of have almost no desire to do it. Curious to hear some of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, sure. So, like, kind of the archetype example that comes to mind for me went for like somebody getting fixated on a hand that like emotionally felt bad and putting a lot of effort into something not necessarily that valuable is like you're making a big call or a big bluff in 3 bet or 4 bet pot kind of river decision in a very, very specific spot where like you make this huge call at the table and you don't know if you were right or wrong and you lost and so you feel bad and you want to look it up later and you pull up the closest sim you can find to this spot and you dig through to this river node and you find your exact combo that you called with and maybe it was a good call and now you're relieved. And maybe, oh shit, it looked like a fine hand to call with, but actually it loses 8 big blinds to call the river with this hand in a 200 big blind pot. And it's not obvious that that is actually an important mistake that you can learn a lot from. Like, maybe it's some spot where calling with queen jack against the computer is terrible and calling with queen 10 is fine because for some very specific reason they have a bunch of king jack bluffs and no king 10 bluffs and like your human opponent is probably not actually playing that way and maybe even if you adjust the stack sizes and bet sizes to be exactly what happened in the hand instead of what's convenient to look up in your model, suddenly that's not even true in that scenario anymore. This stuff can be very, very sensitive to small changes in assumptions, and you're not learning anything that generalizes. And your intuition in the moment that you thought maybe the opponent is bluffing a little more than they should be actually might be more valuable than these little esoterica of how the kickers interact. And yeah, I think you can really do yourself a disservice by spending too much time banging your head against the wall trying to get a computer justification for the play you made and feel better about it, or understand exactly why this was the wrong kicker to call with. I mean, sometimes that kind of investigation is actually pretty valuable and does yield something that generalizes, but I think it can often be a really unuseful kind of perfectionism to put too much effort into that kind of thing. The kind of thing I'm much more interested in spending some time on is when I face a spot that is, at a pretty high reach part of the game tree, a flop spot in a single raised pot cut off against the big blind. If I don't know exactly what I'm doing, that's important. That's a thing I can fix. Those scenarios are going to come up again. It feels really important to me that I have the right idea about how those spots work. And that's not to say that I'm stressed out about getting the bet sizes exactly right or nailing the exact combos that you do any particular thing with, but I do want to get it pretty close with the amount of money I'm putting in the pot from either side and what I think the marginal continue against a C bet is and raising the C bet with roughly the right global frequency. And, if there's a threshold of pure raise, top pair queen kicker or better, I want to have that dialed in. Um, those are the kind of things that, if it comes up in game, I'm playing this spot and I have a sense that I don't know what my strategy is supposed to be, or I'm guessing at my strategy and I don't feel very confident about whether it's right, or my opponent does something that surprises me, where somebody who I think is a really strong player and unlikely to get this wrong does something I'm not expecting. Um, those are the kind of things that I'll take a note on my phone. I want to look at this later and make sure I'm not missing something big that's going to come up again.
Makes a lot of sense. And I've definitely picked up a lot from discussing hands with you, where a relatively common comment in one form or another that you've made to me is, yeah, I don't think that's great, or I don't think that's really a thing, but it also doesn't matter. Like, I can remember a spot where I went B10 on the river once as a donk in a situation, and you're like, kind of curious, not really sure why you did that, but it also just doesn't matter. The difference between that and check was just so irrelevant. And I can picture conversations with other players where that can just be a rabbit hole that people go down for half an hour or an hour, and the equity difference is next to nothing. Maybe it reveals a theoretical hole that,
Right.
breeds a better conversation, but very often, I think there was like a famous debate. For whatever reason, Pads' name is in my head. I think he was the kind of voice of reason who was like, this doesn't matter. But maybe it started on one of his sites or something where people were debating the merits of like three betting or flatting queen jack suited, like late position versus early position for 50. And it just
Mhm.
like went on and on and on. And it was like, I don't know, do both. Like, who cares? Like, probably just don't only do one. I don't know.
I think that's been such a huge trap in the solver era that, and a thing that people who got good before solvers tend to have an advantage at, in my opinion, is that there's just this absolute fire hose of information, more than you could possibly look at in a lifetime. And figuring out what matters is so important. Uh, I mean, this has gotten to be less of a thing as we've all gotten a bit more used to it, but in the first couple years that people were working with solvers, everyone was obsessed with figuring out the right bet sizes everywhere, and it never matters. It never ever matters. It like you take some spot, some, three bet pot or whatever, or single raise pot, and like the best strategy is 30% check and 70% bet 60% pot or whatever. And if you force the computer to play bet 80% or bet 45%. It'll adjust the frequency up or down accordingly and put about the same amount of money in the pot, and it will cost you literally 0 EV. Like, you cannot see the difference. If you make it do something really silly, like bet 150% pot or check, maybe at that point you start losing, like, 0.2% of the pot relative to the strategy you were supposed to play. Um, in all but a few cases, getting the bet size exactly right is, like, the least important thing in the world. Um, and yeah, people put so much effort into trying to get that exactly right, and it's not very important. Um, and I think there's an awful lot that falls into that category of not very important. And finding the things that are important and making sure that you understand those well is it's a difficult skill, and it pays really big rewards, I think.
When you're talking about that, one of the things that goes through my mind is that you're not one of the only people who understands that. And yet, in the high stakes tournament world, I think of you and Makita as two of the only people who are truly willing to practice it. And I think what holds a lot of people back is an unwillingness to be seen as not good or not understanding a certain concept.
Mhm,
I feel like in the tournament world, there is at the high level such an emphasis on knowledge.
mhm,
And if you don't display that knowledge or something appears where someone might think you're ignorant of a situation, um, that word spreads really quickly. This guy's out of touch. This guy doesn't know what's up. And I think a lot of people's egos can't really handle that. Or maybe they would be able to handle it, but they don't want to risk it.
mhm.
That being known, one of the questions I ask myself, and this is true of everything, it's not just high stakes tournament poker. I think, anyone who's not an antisocial sociopath cares somewhat what people think.
Of
But
course.
it seems like in the tournament and the high stakes tournament world, there is a lot of emphasis on being seen as one of the best, being respected for your game by your peers. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of it comes from the fact that the variance is so massive that you can't just prove it like you can in some sports where it doesn't matter that my technique's not right, I'm going to win. You can't really go out there and just say, doesn't matter that I'm good, like I will prove it with my results. You might never get a chance to prove it with your results. And so it seems like this emphasis on being known as very good has a more controlling element in a lot of people in the tournament world's approach.
Yeah, for sure, and I mean, I don't think you can underestimate the fact that the tournament world is so reliant on selling and swapping action too. Like, it is important to your bottom line that people think you're good. You can't play the highest stakes tournaments if there aren't at least some sharp people with a lot of money who think you're good enough to buy your action. Um, so yeah, it is important to stay in business that people respect your game. Um, as opposed to, like, a lot of my earlier experience in my poker career was cash games, particularly heads up cash games, where, I want people to think I suck. That's great. I want to get action. Um, so I do think having that past experience, while I can appreciate that it is professionally important that at least some subset of people think I'm good, I do also have the voice in my head saying, "Oh, if people think I suck, that's great." Um, I'd like to be underestimated by my opponents. Um, so yeah, I think I am. less concerned about that, have less of a reflex to be concerned about that than people who have been tournament specialists their whole career. Uh, and yeah, some of these things like getting the right c bet size on the flop is a perfect example of the kind of mistake that will get people talking shit about you and that doesn't matter. Like if you used a big c bet on a board that's only small c bets and it's like a really common spot that everyone's supposed to know. Yeah, that makes you look unprepared. And it often is a pretty good signal that you're unprepared if you are making that kind of routine error in a spot that you're supposed to know. But it's not a costly mistake, and it's even a deviation that it's not hard to justify with pretty unambitious guesses about how your opponent will make small mistakes against it or whatever. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that I think people can be unduly fixated on, both in terms of like making sure they never ever make a mistake like that and overestimating or misinterpreting the signal that they're getting when they spot that somebody else has made a mistake like that.
That's an area where I'm pretty jealous of some of the sharper recreationals who play high stakes tournaments. Where, for whatever people may think of me, and I definitely have some varied opinions in the high stakes world, but I some of the recs can do something a little silly, like you mentioned, like they could just go B80 on a king king deuce rainbow, and a lot of pros are just so excited to see something that's so clearly not grounded in theory and looks like some weird exploit or unprepared player, and ready to just take a full exploitative approach to them across the board, and for such a cheap price they can just get people to play them exactly like they want, and turn it around and build an excellent strategy just from doing something silly like a check raise 2x and then just check fold the turn on some board where that doesn't make any sense. And it's like, yeah, the actual equity bleed was probably really tiny depending on their cards. And now all of a sudden, a huge group of people are going to spread that information like wildfire, and play very exploitative strategy that's easy to suss out.
Yeah, yeah. It's really not hard to like overreact to something like that and end up trying to counter exploit it the wrong way and making a much bigger mistake than the initial like small theoretical error.
That's something, just in general, because the margins are so small in high stakes and the ROIs are not big. I feel like when regs do see something that looks like a mistake and probably is a mistake, they get so excited and overreact really quickly. And I feel like it's like a desperation. It's like you're hungry and you see, like, a tree in the distance and you see some color and you're like, we're rich. We've got apples and mangoes or whatever. You get there, there's like one apple hanging from the tree. It's
Yeah.
not that much. And you kind of, completely ruin it when you overreact. And it seems like there's a lot of that. All
Yeah, I
right.
think so.
Do you ever worry that you've learned most of the lessons and kind of gone through most of the growth that poker has for you?
I don't think so. I'm still really far from like ever getting through a day where I don't have several spots I'm curious about. Poker's really hard. The ceiling on what you can know is really, really high, especially once we start talking about like tournament considerations, later stages, final table stuff. No one is even close. That there is just an endless amount to learn, and I mean, for that, a lot of that stuff, I don't know that we even have a framework where it's clear that the answers are out there and readily accessible. I think a lot of that remains open to intuition and guesswork, trying to fill in the gaps. Yeah, I haven't reached a point at all in my poker career where I feel like I've never had the thought I'd like to spend some time today studying and getting better at poker, but I just can't come up with anything to do. Like, not at all.
You ready for a round of the game?
Yes.
All right, that is your card. Question 1. You are having dinner with anyone dead or alive. This is who you're having dinner with. In this case, everybody is good, so 2 is just above neutral. It's about as close to neutral as possible. So there's no bad dinner guests for you in this. Not to say that nobody would be bad, but you know what I'm saying?
I just exclude anybody who would be below neutral. So uh,
Yeah.
2
Yeah.
is just above neutral, and
Ace is your top dinner guest, dead or alive, of all time. And here's the thing,
yeah.
they're happy to dine with you. So if it's a violent person, they're not going to hurt you.
Okay.
Yeah, they're down for a good dinner with Ike. And take your
Okay.
time.
Take my time. A person to have dinner with.
A few moments later.
I have lost every round I've played on the podcast. I pride myself on my ability, and I'm getting fucked so hard. In fairness, some have been close. 3. We're going with a 3.
It was a 4.
Oh, we're right there. 3. It's a 3.
It's a 4.
Again. And 1 was Ponikov's with the worst answers I've ever heard. I asked that guy for a tattoo that will be permanently on his forehead. He said
Ex-girlfriend name.
that was a 10.
Okay. I'm gonna go with... No, never mind. All right, no, I think I've got one.
Hit me.
Mason Malmuth.
Mason Malmuth. Okay. I thought for a moment I didn't know who that was, but I do. All right. Simpler question for the follow-up. This is what you're eating for dinner. We're going to put it within the realm of reason as far as things Ike has had for a meal over the past 5 years, Doesn't have to be exact, but, we're
Wait,
not saying
is it still where 2 is just above neutral, or is 2 now like the
no,
worst thing I've had for dinner
that
in the last
exactly.
several years? Okay.
Yeah.
Um, can I describe the thing in question to clarify if just a couple of words does not suffice to describe it?
Yes, so
Or
long
should
as they're not adjectives like a tasty this or a like disgusting that. Like be reasonable and I think a couple of descriptive words are okay if they're more objective and less preferential. Like it doesn't have to be an actual meal you had. What I mean is like a Haitian dirt pie is not going to be a 2. It's something you ate, I would think, or something like conceivable. I would think like a granola bar probably counts. There's, stick of beef jerky.
a grilled chicken sandwich in which the chicken was raw.
Oh fuck! All right, Mason. um, so salmonella is on the table. This is 2 through 4 territory. I'm I'm glad there was such clarity on the second question because I did not want to offend Mason, and I, knowing very little except that he authored some poker books, I think along with Skolansky, I had him in the 3 to 5 zone, but it would have been really sad if maybe he was just your queen and he's like real cool game theory dude that you would super enjoy talking to about something. So the raw chicken has me grounded. We've got an anchor in place in the 2 through 4 zone. I can't. It's raw. Like when we put a health risk out there, I don't see how we're not at 2. I'm sorry, Mason. 2.
Yeah, 2.
All right, nice. Finally one around on the game. 2 is supposed to be pretty easy though. We need another round. It doesn't
For
feel. It feels like asterisk win.
what a food that is rated 2 should be, yeah. I should be able to get you there.
Yeah, we did it. I finally synced up with somebody. All
And
right,
I
one
don't
more
want to
round.
knock Mason too badly. To be clear, that was slightly better than neutral.
Yeah,
That
yeah. You
It's,
would like to have dinner with him.
huge swath of people I have met or know of are ineligible by virtue of I would easily rather eat alone than with the person in question.
I tried this with Nick once, and he was sure that there aren't 13 people he wants to dine with, so it wasn't a doable question. The regular random cards, and I gave them a free promo on the last podcast too, and now the website's down. I must have driven too much traffic their way. No, it's back. It wasn't working earlier. All right, you're getting the primo card.
Oh,
What
nice.
the? It went right back to. Hang on. Okay. All right. Look away. Got a card? Okay, I'm gonna hit it a few times so I don't accidentally
Sure.
spoil it when I pick up my phone. I don't actually have questions for you, so I gotta think.
Okay.
All right. You are hosting a podcast, 10 episodes, limited release. This is the topic of your podcast, and you have access to good guests for whatever this topic is. The only thing that matters to you is your enjoyment in hosting this podcast.
I
That's
enjoy
the only
hosting
relevance.
the podcast.
2 is garbage. You are not having a very good time hosting this
2 is like
podcast.
this would be painful and embarrassing, and I could barely get through it.
Yeah, we're gonna
Ace
say only
is
embarrassing to yourself. Like your reputation's not going to be on the line. Um,
okay.
but yeah, an ace is just enjoyable experience. Never thought I wanted to host a podcast, but that's pretty cool.
Okay, with the caveat that I don't think I would be an excellent podcast host, nor is it a thing that has ever really appealed to me very much.
Fair.
But in the spirit of the question, a thing that I think corresponds to this number for how much I would like to do it. Medieval ship construction.
Some pretty good guests. All right. Question 2. You're having a conversation with Daniel DeVoris. This is what you guys are talking about.
A few moments later.
How to get cheaper airline tickets.
Divorce is good at a lot of things. I'm not even sure he's good at that though. So you might not even be getting much benefit. It's certainly a bore. I thought you might double down on the medieval ship construction. I thought that might just get
It was
played
the first thing
twice.
that came to my mind was just to say that again, but then I thought about it more, and they don't actually line up, because neither one
That's
of us
fair.
would have anything to say about that.
It's honest. I respect you passing on the joke. I think you hate that second conversation as much as I do. 4.
7.
Fuck. 3. Oh, man. Medieval ship construction could be kind of cool.
Yeah, like, I can just imagine a large universe of stuff that I would actually really hate talking about, whereas that's just, like, I've never thought about it before. I don't know anything about it. It's never occurred to me to be curious about it. But, if I was talking to a bunch of people who knew a lot about it, I bet they'd have interesting things to say. I bet I could get 10 hours of entertainment out of that, and I would I wouldn't learn anything useful, I don't think, but I would learn some things. Could be fun. And
I
then
think the few Yeah,
yeah,
the
go ahead.
very little I've heard about ship construction back in the day has kind of like floored me. I wish I retained any of it to actually spill some knowledge out here, but like I don't remember the techniques, but how they had fires on some of these ships that were wooden is
Yeah.
pretty phenomenal. I can't remember what the techniques they would do was, but what they would do, but yeah, that seems like a solid 7. I thought there was I thought that was lower with divorce, but I can see it.
Maybe that should have been lower, but, like, I feel like that's a conversation we could end up actually having in practice and not immediately being like, "Oh god, we need to stop talking about this." Like, it would be, scraping the bottom of the barrel or, like, the sort of
Where does
conversation.
weather relate to that?
I can't imagine talking about the weather for more than, like, a couple sentences, whereas, like, if one or the other of us, like, found a new website to use or travel agent or something, I mean, it is a thing I think about a bunch, even though it, like, is actively painful to engage with. I do actually care about getting a nice flight at a good price with all the places I go, and, like, it's the sort of thing we end up talking to each other about.
Let me take you back. Don't know where this was. This was a relatively recent Triton. Where did we play before Montenegro?
Was Jeju the last one?
Jeju. There we go. I open UTG. You 3-bet UTG 1. I 4-bet. You call. Ace high flop. I bet. You call. Turn. I check call. River. I check. You jam. This was 150 BB deep, maybe more.
Hmm.
I burn a bunch of time banks. I'm sure this is like the 4th straight time that we've played over 100 BB pot where you're going to fuck me up. And I side call and you turn over a bluff. I don't feel any joy, just pure relief that I'm not walking to the rebuy desk one more time because of Ike. And as I'm pulling in the chips, just pure relief, and you're sitting there with the one chip you left behind, the dealer charges me 4 time banks. I pay gladly. And then you go, I think it was only 3. And I'm just like, this fucking guy. He's on top of my time bank situation, completely unfazed, no difference to the cadence of your voice, anything. And a Jason Kuhn quote came to me where I don't remember his exact words, but he said with emphasis that he has never met someone who takes losses as well as you. And granted, this was level 1. I don't remember what the buy-in to this was, but that has been my experience being around you. Another, continuing this opening theme of the podcast with Ike is an alien. I think I take losses very well. I've been complimented on that my whole career and taken a lot of pride in it. And you just take the cake. Curious where that comes from, if that was always the case, if internally it's a lot different than what I'm seeing externally. Um, I know that, if there was a magic pill that we could all take to, handle losses better, we would all be interested in that. So shed some of this wisdom.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that is probably more than anything else, something I've always had, and I'm not sure exactly where it comes from. It's something I've made a point to cultivate as time has gone on, too. It does strike me as a useful skill, both from a perspective of optimizing your play. It is best to be unbothered by that stuff, and also optimizing your quality of life as a person who competes and gambles, to not be feeling bad about that stuff away from the table. So yeah, it's something I take seriously and work on, but it's also something that I'm pretty sure did come relatively easily to me for reasons I can't take credit for. I've my dad mentioned this to me, that like it was conspicuous to him even when I was, in my early teens playing sports, that right up until the game was over, I appeared to care as much, if not more, than anyone else out there about winning. And then as soon as it was over, I seemed to get over losses immediately and not be bummed out the way other kids would be. Um, so I do think that that's just a quirk of my personality somehow. Um, I've tried to think about where that comes from, and I'm not even all that sure. Um, but yeah, it's also something that I've tried to be really mindful of as I've you know worked on myself as a professional poker player, that like I see myself having negative thoughts about losing, and immediately can call that out to myself and say, oh, I'm feeling bummed out about losing. That's not useful. That's not pleasant. Let's not fight it, but just notice it and not attach to it and let it go. uh that's the sort of thing that the meditation I found is really helpful for that exact thing of, I am going to notice a feeling, and I'm not going to fight it, but I'm also not going to attach to it. And yeah, that whole practice of noticing feelings arise and watching them go away is a big part of what one does when meditating. So bringing mindfulness to bear on that, I think, is helpful. And it's so clear that doing the alternative of like really latching onto those bad feelings and engaging with them, it doesn't go anywhere useful. So it feels relatively easy to just see that as some of the most irrelevant noise that your brain can generate, and just not engage too much with it. And it helps to be at a point in my poker career where my confidence that I'm playing well is not easily shaken, and the financial swings are not make or break for my quality of life away from the table in any way. And there's just no compelling reason to be super attached to results on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, that's the thing I've prioritized for sure. And that I do like pride myself on a bit. I take a moment to feel good about it when I am getting crushed and it's not ruining my day. That like, easier said than done, but like, if you can actually put yourself in the mind state of, I'm in for 5 bullets today, that's hilarious. Today is a fun day in a silly way. Like, that's just a fine way to react to that. There's no downside to reacting that way. You don't have to be mad at yourself for being in for 5 bullets if you lost the first 4 playing well. So, like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if any of that is
Yeah.
either useful or relatable. I do have a bit of a sense that I sound like an alien when I'm talking about this stuff.
No, it resonates with me. I do think
Yeah,
I'm,
you're similar to me about this stuff, I'm pretty sure.
I think for me, I don't know. I don't think it was natural for me as a teenager. I worked really hard to cultivate it when I became a professional poker player. Between 18 and 20, I took a lot of very serious steps. But I do
Mhm,
remember when you just said kind of enjoying, like, just kind of laughing at I'm in for 5 bullets. I remember this like kind of seminal moment for me. I was maybe 19 and I had just gotten obliterated the night before in Heads Up Sit and Goes. It was
mhm,
just a tragic night. I lost somewhere just north of 10% of my net worth. And I went to play basketball with friends, and basketball went well. But I remember on my ride home being in a great mood. Like, whatever, I played well, I'm sure, that day that contributed to my mood, basketball. But
mhm.
I had a good time with my friends, and I'm driving home and I'm remembering, you got obliterated last night. Like, this is not a hole you're going to dig yourself out of very likely in the next 2 weeks, kind of thing. And I was like, but I'm in a good mood. It's okay. And I like kind of knew what I was like. It wasn't this like put yourself back together, make yourself feel good. Like, I genuinely felt good. And I remember being baffled that I could feel good.
Mhm.
And I was just like, that's fucking awesome. Like,
Yeah.
maybe I've turned a corner on something and this is really exciting. And I remember one of the steps that I took that I'm curious how this works for you, but a suggestion I'll give students who have a lot of trouble with this is not a fun thing. This is not a fun suggestion, but I find it very important is you might have to enjoy winning less. You might, if you want to take
Mhm.
losses less hard, you can't engage to that same degree of ecstasy maybe with everything that goes well. And I remember I would get dinner with my dad once a week. Back when I, first dropped out and started playing professionally, and for a long time, maybe a couple of years, he would say, Jonathan, you had a fabulous week. I saw you, beat the shit out of this guy and you made all this or whatever. Like, how much did you make on the week? Was it blah, blah, blah? And I'd say, and I'd enjoy it. And then the next week would come, oh, saw you had a tough week. My dad's not needling me at all. He
Right.
loves me and, supports, but it feels like shit. And at a certain point, I said, Dad, I know you're not trying to make me feel bad, but like, we can't talk about the wins either, because if it's silence on the weeks I do bad about poker and it's all this celebrating when I do well, I'm just going to feel shit when the silence happens. And we just kind of have to bring the wins down too and just kind of make, discussing poker results a much smaller part of our relationship. And I
Mhm,
realized I kind of had to do that with just about everyone, as much as, especially in those early years where like I was about the only professional poker player I knew. I didn't
mhm.
really have a circle. It was exciting when people would be like, you just won that tournament or what's going on? And I realized that it felt so lonely and fraudulent when things were going badly. Like, do I report the bad news or what's going on? And I just kind of was like, maybe just don't talk about results, and then you'll feel less, but you will experience kind of less of that joy when things are going well.
Yeah, no, that's all very relatable to me, and, like, to the point of not taking losses too hard coming naturally to me, I think that part did too. I don't think I was ever somebody who got that excited about wins most of the time. And maybe that part uh almost required more conscious cultivation as I became a professional poker player. But I definitely did that. That like yeah, I'm not gonna celebrate every time I have a winning day. I'm not gonna
You're saying this, and I'm picturing my first apartment with super high ceilings. I had like an indoor basketball hoop at like 8.5 feet, and I would just be like, "Let's fucking go!" and just dunk the shit out of a ball when I win like a heads up sit and go. I loved celebrating wins.
yeah.
It took me a bit to tamp down that instinct.
Yeah, I think from very early on, I made a point of conditioning myself that, like, literally the result doesn't matter. The thing I care about is playing well. And I'm not going to celebrate when I win. I'm not going to get angry about it when I lose. I'm going to finish my session, and the thing I want to evaluate is, did I play well today? And, I mean, to some extent, yeah, of course, I'm in a better mood when I win than when I lose. And, I would celebrate a big win a bit. You gotta have some fun with your job. You can't just refuse to ever feel good or insist on only ever feeling good about, like, I put in the hours and I executed adequately. But yeah, I really tried to minimize that and not attach to it. And I think you're absolutely right that those do go together. That, yeah, what is it exactly? Like, yeah, I guess you can't be emotionally engaged with your results in only one direction. You just have to cultivate that distance for both kinds of results. I think that's the only way it works. That seems right to me.
Feels right with most things in life where
Yeah.
if you let yourself feel a lot, you're going to feel both ends of the spectrum quite fully. And if you kind of reduce that feeling to some degree, then you're more at equilibrium, but you are sacrificing some of the, maybe peak pleasures or peak ecstasy
Yeah.
involved with just leaving yourself completely unguarded.
Yeah, I think that's right.
All right, good. We solved it.